Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Old Hunt, where we are still celebrating 10 years of Bloodborne. We are playing through version 1.00 of the Japanese release, and last time we took on Rom, the vacuous spider, the one who was sort of holding the state of the world in artificial peace, and we have revealed, I don't know if we can see it from here, no, too crowded in these winding streets back here. But anyway, we revealed the state of the world. We revealed the blood moon. And having done so, we then went and explored some of the effects of that revelation and what it means to have all of these ritual doings exposed. And many of these things, not all of them, but many of them you can see if you have a high enough insight level. But as I was sort of saying before, the regular course is defeating Rom. That's when all of a sudden you have this moment of great revelation. Also, I realized I forgot to point this out. There was also an amygdala right here. It's been here the whole time. If you'll remember back, a long time ago, I hinted towards this. When you go pick up that armor set, wherever it was, you can trigger... Where was that? Here's that armor set. So now we can see that same... Actually, I want to get grabbed, because that's another point that I want to demonstrate. You can see the effect there. Alright, and I'm going to get grabbed here. Notice that what did damage to me was the frenzy. And the effect of being grabbed was that I was teleported. Right? And I think that's super interesting, because what it shows is that, we didn't even get teleported super far away. Here we are right here, same basic place. What it shows is that this particular amygdala, like the other amygdala we've interacted with so far, isn't necessarily what you'd call hostile. Seems maybe curious, right? Hanging out here on the side of the church, on the side of Erden Chapel in there. And if you come close, it sort of reaches down. It's got some sort of cosmic effect on its grasp that sort of sucks you in. And then you're confronted with the impossibility of its nature, which is more than your brain can handle, and you experience frenzy. But that's not like something it's doing actively, I don't think. That's just an effect of you beholding it. That's the weakness of your mind, not the, malicious intent that it has towards you. And then the actual grasp, when it closes its hand, doesn't produce any additional damage, I don't think. It just teleports you some other place. And in this case, we didn't get teleported to another dimension. This, by the way, if we had the DLC, it will teleport us into a nightmare that is the Hunter's Nightmare, that is the DLC, after you get an item, just like the one outside the entrance to Yahar Ghul. That one, when it grabs you, if you don't have the Tonsil Stone, similarly, it will teleport you back, just a relatively short distance. But when you do have the Tonsil Stone, it will teleport you into the nightmare that is the lecture building. So there's a certain extent to which we can sort of consider some of these amygdala, which clearly there are multiple of them. Some of them seem to be relatively just passive, curious. And it's a really cool revelation. And a long, long time ago, when I was first bringing up the point of Bloodborne will put something in front of you and not give you the context for it, but as you play the game, then reveal the context for it, I think that's one of the things that makes this reveal so powerful. Because I remember the first time I played this game, right? It's been out for 10 years. I don't think this necessarily shocks anybody anymore. But when I first played this game, the moment you defeat Rom, it's just like the entire world is suddenly different, right? You're getting a different state in terms of what time it is. We've seen that before as we went from the end of the day towards the setting sun to the night, right? We've seen that sort of change before. But to see a change before that reveals something about the world that's always been there, but that we've never been able to perceive before, that is extremely cool. And it's also extremely cool that you can sort of cheat it if you have a high enough level of insight early on in the game, or at earlier points before you've defeated Rom. Again, ties in with that translation that I was talking about before, about the insightful truth, that they could have called it, the true enlightenment, right? Because this here is what the world must look like to someone who's more enlightened, right? They walk around and they would see the amygdala there from the beginning. So, very interesting. and I think a great use of an interesting storytelling technique, right? It's a setup and a payoff, which is a very traditional storytelling technique, but the setup that's happening is like a conundrum, an impossibility, a strange thing that you think, is that a glitch? Does that really happen? What's going on? You don't have the tools to make sense of it, to really put it together. And, you can even get grabbed by the thing, and you're like, wow, what happened? Where'd my health go? And if there are enemies around, right, then you're in a bad spot, right? Then all of a sudden, you're in a much worse position because you don't know what happened to you, and your health is suddenly super low because your brain got blown by the insight, the frenzy buildup, and, so there's all sorts of ways in which that's bad news. But just in terms of the, reaction that you have, I just love the way that it sort of comes around like this. And the reveal is the additional context that they've set up long before. And we've talked about how they've done that mechanically. We've talked about there's all sorts of examples all through this game of how they use that sort of narrative technique in a very clever and effective way. But this, I think, has to be like the most iconic version of it. So I didn't want to just run past this amygdala again and just not pay it any mind. I wanted to call it out because it's a 10-year celebration of Bloodborne, and I think this is one of the big moments to celebrate. At least if your playthrough was anything like mine the first time you picked up this game. Which, I don't know, maybe that wasn't 10 years ago for you. Maybe that was relatively recently. Maybe you're following along with this playthrough for the first time. I don't know. I know there was a little while where I had some people who were watching through for the first time, but I don't know if they've stuck with it. Person I was fairly confident was following along, ended up falling off, but no shame to them. It happens. I understand. Life gets busy. Things change. Hopefully they'll come back and maybe check it out later. But anyway, whatever stage you are in experiencing Bloodborne, I hope you're having a good time with the playthrough. We're going to carry on now. I am going to go, I think I ended the last episode by talking about we get to the end of the Eileen storyline. I do want to get there. I also want to go back to the Hunter's Dream, sort of restock things. I sort of foolishly exposed myself to that amygdala's grip, and now I'm down on HP. I want to replenish my blood vials. Eileen's going to be a little bit of a challenge, but we'll be back in action soon. Okay, we're back, and you may notice my blood echoes haven't really changed, because I got to the dream and I thought about it, and I thought, well, this will replenish my blood vials, this will replenish my HP. I could do something with the blood echoes that I have, so that's the smart thing to do. And then there's the risky thing to do. See, if I have right now less blood echoes than I need to level up, and that's because of my chalice dungeoneering, of course. I wouldn't normally be this far ahead of the leveling curve, where 29,000 wouldn't be sufficient to level me up, but I am. So because I'm in this position, and because I'll be probably, at some point, doing a little bit more chalice dungeoneering to make up for 29,000 if I happen to lose them, I want to be a little bit risky. I want to live a little dangerously. We're going to go into the confrontation with replenished resources, yes, but still putting all those blood echoes on the line. This could be a very foolish decision. Very foolish decision on my part. However, I think it'll be fun. I think it'll be something worth doing anyway. So we could not, unfortunately, go down the route. I think I remember reading, it was a long time ago now, remember reading that Eileen's normal storyline is bugged here, where you can sort of help her, and you find her outside the Grand Cathedral. At the moment, our buddies with the crosses seem to have moved on. They're not around anymore. And, enemy changes happen at night. Maybe Eileen got to them, right? Because one version of the quest, she's, out here and asking... Well, she's not exactly asking for your help. She's telling you not to advance, but she's on death's door here. And then the other instance, the one that we're in, where you don't go back and help her, even though she doesn't ask for your help. This is the way that the storyline plays out this time. And I just to finish the thought, here she is. So one way or another, it's possible that she defeated the enemies stationed outside the Grand Cathedral.
Few hunters can resist the intoxication of the hunt. Just the same as all the rest. Hunters must die. The nightmare must end. Then I can stop madness.
I wanted to let you finish talking, but geez. Eileen, I know I look like a beast right now, but I swear, I'm in control. I should not go toe-to-toe with the Blade of Mercy when it comes to speed. That is a battle that I am probably destined to lose. Okay. Aw, come on. This is a battle that I am probably destined to lose. The other NPC that you can fight in the other version of this quest is actually harder than this. But wow, Eileen, what a boss. I love it. Okay. I like this form of your weapon better. Or rather, I like fighting against it better. Okay. Oh, boy. Yeah, I'd rather deal with Eileen throwing these knives at me than the other NPC which fires the double gun, the double barrel pistol, and deals insane damage. Not that Eileen's damage is low here. Good grief. Half my blood vial's gone and I've barely even scratched her. But yeah, this is sort of the outcome. This is the bad outcome, where if you don't really help Eileen, she goes mad herself in thinking that sort of all hunters are doomed to go mad. And I sort of started up with the thought a long time ago, and I think it's worth coming back to now. That, you know, she doesn't ask for your help, but I think that if you go and provide it anyway, you sort of show her that she's not alone.
The hunt makes hunters mad.
Maybe despite all the sort of inherent nature of the despair of her work, of her being forced to hunt hunters who go blood drunk, right? Amidst the challenge of living with that, while at the same time trying to maintain her own sanity and trying to do things like welcome the new hunter. When we first talk to her, right? She has to have in the back of her head that there's a chance that the hunters that she welcomes will end up being people who go blood drunk before her, right? And, you know, what a hard mission it is that she took upon herself. And in this version of the storyline, you know, she can't ultimately bear the weight of that. And I think that's fine, right? As a potential story outcome, I prefer the one where you help her and possibly through showing her that connection, give her some additional hope. She holds on and then sort of is able to pass on her profession to you. And that, too, is another sort of very Bloodborne sort of outcome, where you take up the work of another. You inherit the title of the Hunter of Hunters, and you take on the legacy in memory of the hunters of the past, right? Good. Okay, that one-handed form of the weapon. Definitely easier to deal with than the two-handed one. Nope. Not super easy, though. You know, I've got these executioner's gloves here, just doing nothing. I think maybe I should use them for something. They're better than the stats I'm using with my beast claws anyway. Oh, she dodged them. What a boss. Eileen's so cool. Yeah, only getting one ghost to hit her is less than ideal. Oh, that was interesting. We both moved in for the attack and we both missed. That was not the sort of interval I was looking for. Not worth it. She dodged right through them again. She dodged right through them again. Yeah, I didn't... Not exactly thrilled with the performance of the Executioner's gloves against Eileen here. Then again, I'm not exactly thrilled with my performance against Eileen either. No! Wow. The hunt does make hunters mad. She has a point. One way or another, this version of Eileen, or the one that you find the alternative NPC, who fans have taken to calling the Bloody Crow of Canehurst. These are like some of the straight up hardest enemies in the game. It's kind of wild, but hunter enemies do tend to be harder than regular world enemies. Makes some amount of sense, right? Hunters are the greatest threats, or they're supposed to be, out there on the streets. Can make for some very frustrating battles. But we'll see. We'll see. I'm still hopeful. I haven't really lost the Blood Echoes yet. We'll see if I can maintain them in my continued failures. Definitely don't mind getting shot. That is not the scariest weapon in Eileen's toolkit there. Alright, I can really only reliably get off 2 hits there. Okay. I've learned my lesson. Uh-oh. She got to escape. Yeah, the nice thing about the Blade of Mercy that they emphasize when you get the weapon is that sort of hitting away thing that makes use of quick stepping. We had the same idea. I got 3 hits in that time. That wasn't too bad. Okay. You want to transform your weapon back, Eileen? I don't like the 2-handed version. Ooh, I got 4 hits in that time. That was actually pretty decent. I'll just heal up. Starting to find better moments to heal. Okay. Nope. Nope. I gotta get out of that one. That was a pattern that was gonna kill me. Oh boy. She's got a surprising amount of range. Ha! Gotcha. Uh-oh. She always wins when we have the same thought. When we start to attack at the same time, she's the one who wins in that scenario. If I can preempt her, my weapon's fast enough that that's helpful. Oh, man. I thought I saw her transform her weapon back, and I thought maybe I'd win that round, but definitely not. Very effective at stopping those, stopping me from healing with the blood vials.
The beast cannot be stopped! What good hunters now? Your blood is mine! A hunter's blood for me! Your punishment is death! Death to hunters! Enough of this terrible dream!
I'm sorry, Eileen. Ah, that turned into a quick step attack. And I did not necessarily want that. Yeah. Yeah, my own quick step attack is... I always forget about those. when I show off, like, what moves a weapon can do, I always do, like, the regular R1s and R2s and things. And maybe throw in some L1s and L2s. Occasionally, I'll check transformation attacks. But a lot of the time... Oh, you know what I used to do on my old playthrough for... Okay, it doesn't work when it doesn't hit them. My old playthrough for Translation Born, I realized that if you can get the Executioner's Gloves to land a hit, like that, it staggers the enemy. Okay, Eileen's fast. She's quick to recover. It staggers the enemy for a little bit. And so sometimes you can follow up on that stagger with an attack and get in a bunch of damage. I was saying something else, but I've completely forgotten it in the heat of battle. Oh, that time the... Oh, I thought maybe I could finish her. Got greedy. Nope, nope, nope. Come on. Oh, I dodged right into that knife. No! Okay, that's fine. I've got, what, 2 more shots of these? Now. She got me. She got me! What a legend. I'm gonna cut forward until I win this fight.
You monsters. All hunters must die.
Again, I'm sorry, Eileen. And we get the Crow Hunter badge. She would pass that on to us if she were still alive. Man. What an intense fight! I knew I'd need all my resources. Needed a bunch of tries. Whew. Yeah, I still think the Bloody Crow is actually a more difficult enemy, but Eileen's no joke. Eileen is no joke. Anyway, I think that calls for some recovery time in the dream. I will see you again soon. Okay, and the other thing we can do while we're here in the dream, while we're sort of recovering, is we can come up here and we can get a hold. We should be able to get a hold of her outfit. Is it not available from this shop? Is it available from the item sellers? Ah, here we are. Okay, this is the other reason I thought it might be smart of me to hang on to my Blood Echoes, is because I knew this set was rather expensive. So I can't really afford it. But, I mean, I don't have to be able to buy it to read the description. I just like to wear something after I pick it up. So, anyway, let's get into this description, because this is important. This is a piece of evidence I've been looking for quite a while. Okay, so this is the beak mask, and if we go down to just check about the uniqueness of the descriptions, we can see that it is mostly the same on the beak mask, except for the opening section. The opening section is different, but the rest of the description is the same as what we see here on the garb. And the garb has a different name. The garb is the crow feather garb. The garb essentially being the chest piece. I'm sticking with the official translation for that because I think it makes a lot of sense. And then we have the crow feather arm wrappings. Interesting. I wanted to say gloves, but it's arm wrappings. And then here, okay, so again, the description is all going to be the same, except the second line has been removed. So it looks like all the text is moving, but it's only just moving up to account for the fact that that second line is not there. And then the crow feather trousers in the official translation. Alternatively, the crow feather pants. If you were, I don't know, a little bit more North American English inclined, it's got exactly the same as the armbands here. So the one difference are the opening in these two sets of attire, probably just to differentiate how they look physically. So but let's go through them here. Wood-carved mask of Eileen, the crow feather hunter of hunters. Inside the strange beak is crammed fragrant herbs that eliminate the stench of blood and beasts. Okay, so moving on to the central line here, we have, it is said that the modeling of the hunter of hunters on the form of a crow is because of the meaning of a bird funeral. And bird funeral, it's sky burial is the concept that you would translate that into, right? Because the idea is you leave out a body and the birds come and they peck up and they eat away the body and they take it away. And so it's sometimes referred to as sky burial because you leave it out exposed to the sky and the birds come eat it. But that's where the bird funeral part comes from in the like literal characters for the Japanese there. So they're saying, you know, the hunters of hunters dress themselves essentially to look like crows to get at the idea of these sky funerals, sky burials. Anyway, so let's move on to the final section. The first hunter of hunters was a foreigner and chose not a blasphemous Yarnum funeral, but an honorable method from their hometown, essentially. That's the first two lines of the final section, because they very clearly run together in the original Japanese. And this is an interesting one here because I think, I can't remember exactly what the official translation is, but it's basically gets the same meaning across. And the thing that's interesting to me is my natural inclination on reading this has always been to think of how, okay, the practice of sky burial is viewed as honorable in the native culture of the foreigner who was the first hunter of hunters. And therefore, the idea of the Yarnum funeral, which would have been a sort of burial, right? Not a sky burial, but an earthen burial, is blasphemous because it seems blasphemous for someone whose method of exposing people to the sky with honor that you would bury them under the ground with shame, right? That's sort of my interpretation of that statement. Other people have taken that same statement, and I think this works whether you're interpreting the Japanese or interpreting the English. It could work this way. They've interpreted that as somehow saying that Yarnum burials themselves have something blasphemous about them. So it's not necessarily the fact that we're contrasting sky burial with earth burial, and the earth burial as a practice is considered blasphemous by this outsider. The idea is there's something sacrilegious or blasphemous about the sorts of burials that happen in Yarnum. And we could sort of see, I think a long time ago in the playthrough, I was talking about there was like a disc or something placed over like a corpse's head inside a sarcophagus, right? So maybe there's these strange rites that happen specifically in a Yarnum burial that the outsider considered blasphemous, and for that reason, they opted for their own tradition of sky burial because that's what they were familiar with, and it wasn't necessarily that they think all earthen burials are blasphemous. So, I mean, it's just this is a natural thing that happens with language. People can be like, read or hear the same exact thing and come away from that statement with a misunderstanding, or maybe not even a misunderstanding, just a different understanding from someone else. And so, like, classic thing about communication. And I think it's totally valid if you want to interpret it as, okay, there's something blasphemous about Yarnum funerals. I personally am still fond of my own interpretation here because I like the contrast of the honorable sky burial with the blasphemous earthen burial and the idea of that sort of resulting from a clash of cultures. But anyway, all of this has been, interesting to talk about from a translation perspective in terms of the meaning, in terms of the like symbolism, the like cool idea of sky burial, right? All of that's been sort of interesting, but the most important line, the thing that I've really been wanting to get through to get to my crazy lore theory and get a little bit of backing support here, is the very final line. So that their comrades' dying will might at least reach heaven, or the hunter's dream. So again, we're referencing this idea of the dying wills. And I've talked before about how the dying wills are sort of like the lingering presence of the dead in this world, right? They're sort of the bloodborne equivalent of souls, right? The will that remains after death, right? You can think of that as the soul, the remaining sort of life force essence of the person. And the idea seems to be in Bloodborne that will like go into the blood. Does all of it always go into the blood? I don't know. Fundamental stuff about Bloodborne's world, very difficult to piece together. But there's an implication here that by using this sky burial, or at the very least an honorable burial method, right? Depending on how you interpret the foregoing set of lines there, right? You're at least giving an honorable burial of some kind. Then that soul, right? That lingering will, that echoing will reach to heaven or the heavens. Or, again, the hunter's dream. The hunter's dream, which I think is a nightmare, and nightmares are afterlives, right? So this is some, I think, important evidence that we have that we can say after people die, there is the hope, right? This is couched in the same sort of paragraph, essentially. I mean, it's not exactly literally the same paragraph, but it's the same sort of idea. It's being presented through a perspective, the perspective of the first hunter of hunters, it seems like. I don't think we can really separate that, right? So this might not necessarily be, this is not like the third person authoritative item description voice that we sometimes get, as far as I can tell. This is sort of explaining the reasoning behind the honorable burial that is contrasted with the blasphemous Yarnum burial. So it's possible that this person does not properly understand how Bloodborne's world works. But if they do properly understand how Bloodborne's world works, right, it fits very nicely. The idea of the hunter's dream as a sort of afterlife. Well, what does that mean for us? That might mean we're dead. That could explain our amnesia. It could explain our weird scent of the moon, because we're uniquely tied to this sort of afterlife, right? And it could fit with this idea that we're uniquely able to sort of bolster our spirit by other souls that we absorb. But I think this one line here at the very end of the Crowfeather set, as this whole thing is known like as a group, is really fascinating and very suggestive about how Bloodborne's world, we can understand it, right? Because it does seem like the hunter's dream is a sort of afterlife, and the nightmare realms are a sort of afterlife, and blood echoes are sort of the equivalent of souls. And this form of burial brings those things closer to the sky. Now, it's also possible that this is just meant to be taken like fairly literally, in the idea that the crows, you leave out the bodies, and the crows eat up the body and the blood, and they fly like literally up into the sky, and that brings them closer, right, into the heavens, and maybe the birds will somehow reach the idea of like when they're up there, reach the hunter's dream. That's another way that we could take this, in which case it's, less exciting. Because I don't think birds having our blood echoes is going to like change a whole lot about, the state of the world and our understanding of it. But I don't know. I think it's fascinating. And this is the thing that really sort of kicked me off on this whole line of inquiry, this line of possibility. And I do wonder about that whole idea of how much the worlds are tied together, right? The influence of the dream upon reality on specifically the night of the hunt, and specifically a night when the red moon is close and all the boundaries are blurred. At the very least, the boundaries between man and beast, but I think probably more boundaries than that, given how much about the world has changed. Interesting. Anyway, let's finish our look at this set real quick here. So again, we're only looking at the changes in the first part here. The very first line, we can see that the final portion, wooden mask, like wood-carved mask, and the word that is being substituted out there at the end of the first line, it's being like that whole phrase of wood-carved mask is being subbed in for hunter garb, right? Hunter garb of Eileen, Crowfeather, hunter of hunters. And then the second line, which is entirely unique from that very first one, is in particular the Crowfeather cape, and this time manto. This is the exact same thing that I was talking about on the student set recently. This time I think the word cape truly does fit, right? Rather than the thick cape, it looked like it had sleeves and was more of sort of a greatcoat on the student set. The Crowfeather set, that looks like a cape made of crow's feathers. Anyway, particularly the Crowfeather cape is symbolic of that, right? So I think that in this case, again, classic reference back to something. I think in that case it's Eileen, right? So the Crowfeather cape is particularly symbolic of Eileen, the Crowfeather hunter of hunters. And then we've already read all of these, right? Because only that second line is the thing that sort of changed in the two pieces above, and then all the rest of the descriptions are shared, right? Even down to that final line about the lingering will, the, like, most of the phrase of blood echoes, right? We've taken out Chino Ishi and we've just gotten Ishi. The dying will of one's comrades, at least reaching to the heavens or possibly a or the hunter's dreams. Dream or dreams, right? Japanese doesn't specify. So that could be the hunter's dream. This hunter's dream is where they hope they end up. Or it could be they hope that fallen comrades awaken in another hunter's dream. Because there's no real strong reason for us to think this is the only hunter's dream out there. I don't see... I do think, like, there's a very old sort of theory that all the giant pillars we see in the sky surrounding the hunter's dream are actually other hunter's dreams. As I recall, it sort of fell out of favor when people were able to hack the game, go to those pillars, and demonstrate that they're really just pillars. But since in the ordinary course of play, nobody can ever do that, it's possible the developers just use these pillars as visual stand-ins for other dreams without bothering to include what they look like from the inside, because that would be impractical. Anyway, Gameplay Matt was going to show off those pillars, but as you'll see, he gets distracted in the course of demonstrating the other changes to the dream. And this is going to, just before I end the episode, I do want to talk about, the dream has changed, by the way. If we look out here, all the clouds are different. Right? Noticeably different lighting. We've got, I think it's much cooler. We've got all this like red down in the bottom, mixed in with the dark gray clouds, and you still get like a certain amount of blue seeping in, but it looks very different than it did before. I don't think the moon has changed. The background music has changed. I haven't really called attention to it. I've sort of been talking over it, and I've had it like the sound down while I was reading the item description. But it's a singing voice now. I want it to be quiet so you can get a good listen to it. It's a singing voice now as opposed to mostly an instrument that's playing the song. And I can't remember. I think the song has changed a little bit. I'm not I'm not an expert on Bloodborne's background music. There have been some very cool musical analyses of Bloodborne and the background music in it, and some of the themes that people have been able to pull out and like mix and match and like come up with different themes and what's the fancy term? Leitmotifs for like different elements in Bloodborne's story, and I think that's very cool. But anyway, I'm gonna try and pick up this crow feather set here, as much of it as I can, and I'm short. I'm about 10,000. I bet I can make that up with some of this cold blood. Do I have multiples of the kin cold blood yet? Will I ever get multiples of the kin cold blood? I don't know. But I've got a lot of multiples of these. Let's use a bunch of these and see what happens. Let's use, I don't want to use all of any of them. Let's use 8 of these. Okay, that should put me over the edge because I needed 16,000. So let's go ahead and grab these now. Very nice. Might as well repair my weapons. Get everything in good order. Okay, and just, to honor Eileen, I should show you. This is the last weapon I was sort of debating about. You can see it has a requirement of 20 strength, and I ended up picking it up. I haven't upgraded it yet. We're not going to switch to that weapon just yet, I don't think. Might go back to Ludwig's Holy Blade. It's way more fun to me than the gun spear here, and the rifle spear, like, I'm interested in getting it working once I get the, quote-unquote broken version going, but we haven't broken it yet, so I don't like reusing a weapon. You know what? How many of these shards do I have? I've got 43, and I need 32 to upgrade one weapon as well as the Logarius wheel. I think I wasn't going to do this because Tonitrus is the weapon that I use in the Translation-Born playthrough, and so I feel like I've already shown it off plenty, but it does work pretty well with this build, or it would work pretty well with this build, and I haven't used it in this playthrough yet, and I've used all these other weapons, except for the Rider Palash, which I can't use effectively, and I've decided I'm not going to use. So let's do it. Let's show off the Tonitrus for a little bit, till we can get the Logarius wheel in good shape. And again, I need 32, and I've got over that number, so let's keep going. Let's get the Tonitrus up to +6. I just don't like the idea of defeating Eileen with that beast weapon and then continuing on with it further. Did I just... Okay, I put Ludwig's blade in place of the saw spear. I actually want the saw spear. but then I want the Tonitrus out. Okay, I'll work on getting this weapon all finalized and ready to go. We're going to progress into Yahar Ghul now for real. I think we've taken care of all the stuff outside of that. It's time to, truly progress back on the main line of the story. But I think it's been an interesting sort of additional quest to go through and consider some of the other changes of the world, consider some of the implications of the attire that we can get from Eileen. I didn't really get a good chance to talk about the dialogue that we get from Eileen. That's not what I want. That's what I want. I didn't really get a chance to talk too much about the dialogue that we get from Eileen, except to sort of note that it was happening, because I was very focused on the battle. Maybe I'll review that in editing and have something to say about it, either edited into this episode or in the next episode. I'm happy to oblige you right now, Gameplay Matt. The one thing I find particularly fascinating is that in Going Mad, Eileen seems to think this is all a bad dream. This is clear enough to see in her line, "Enough of this terrible dream," though you can arguably get some extra nuance out of the Japanese. If we include the previous line, a literal version works out to something like, "Death to hunters." In that way, I will end a or the or maybe even this nightmare. As to how significant this is, well, I'm torn. On the one hand, if we consider the dialogue as a whole, it's pretty clear that Eileen isn't just mad, she's despondent. Her very first line is, "The beasts can no longer be stopped," and she follows that up with, "There is no longer any need for hunters." So it's possible that when she calls for our blood, our death, as well as the blood and death of hunters more generally, she's saying that by killing all hunters and letting the beasts take over, as she believes they're inevitably going to anyway, this nightmarish existence will end. Understood in that light, the official translation makes perfect sense. Furthermore, if we look back to Eileen's first dialogue, we'll see that the translators have already specified that she believes she's the only one who can stop this madness, and therefore sees herself as taking an active role. This would mean the nuance of Eileen's desire to be the one to end the nightmare isn't lost when considering her lines overall. On the other hand, it's possible that we can understand Eileen as having confused dream and reality in a more lore-relevant way. Consider how if you make her hostile while she's still sane, before facing her in the Grand Cathedral, she has a line when she kills you where she asks that you give her regards to the doll. This identifies her as one of our predecessors, like Dura, once bound to the dream and therefore aware that death is not the end for us. So perhaps when she says she wants to bring an end to this nightmare by killing all hunters, she's confused the current scenario with her own hunt while tied to the hunter's dream, when she presumably would have had to hunt down very specific prey to be released from that nightmare realm. Admittedly, that latter idea doesn't work as well with the idea of hunters being useless in the unstoppable rise of the beasts that opens this particular dialogue, so maybe I'm letting the lore potential of these lines blind me here. Alternatively, it's also possible that I haven't given enough credit to the official translation, since now that I have the idea of Eileen confusing this night of the hunt with the one she spent in the hunter's dream in my head, looking back over the official English as a whole, I can see pretty much the same possibility. One way or another, though, one thing I can say for certain is that by making Eileen go mad, specifically by having her bring up the idea of a nightmare or bad dream, it ties in her insanity with the way the game challenges our own sense of what's real. Remember, right from the start of the game, we're told that whatever happens upon our receiving the blood, we may think it all a mere bad dream. That's probably more than enough on the subject of Eileen's madness and the confusing nature of our hunt, though, so I'll hand things back to Gameplay Matt now to close out the episode. For now, I think we've been going for a goodly length, and I hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll be, again, making more progress into Yahar Ghul next time. So thank you all very much for joining me. I'm going to call an end to my hunt for the evening, and I wish all of you good hunting.